Well, last night on the show, we took a look at trading up in the first round, something John Schneider has never done as an NFL general manager. But one thing he used to be known for, built quite a reputation for wanting to trade down in the first round. Hasn't done it since 2019. There's a reason for that. 2019 was a disaster, and he's been a little more risk averse since then. But this year, trading down might make a lot of sense. And so I've put together 3 very realistic scenarios for you of teams that might want to trade up and what it would cost them, what the Seahawks would get in return for the number 18 pick in the first round. And then just for fun, I added a kind of a crazy wild card as well, more of an aggressive move down, or should I say an aggressive move up for the inquiring team. We're going to take a look at that coming up next on this episode of Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Once again, a big thank you to the show's sponsor, Doer, built for doing. Lifestyle apparel for every occasion. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter where you live. Doesn't matter what the temperature is, what time of year it is. Doer has something for you. And right here, this is, to me, the flagship item in their lineup. These stretch performance jeans, all the materials, everything they use to make all of their apparel is made from sustainably sourced materials. Everything is antibacterial, very breathable as well. These jeans move with you. They're very light, 20% stretch. But don't let that fool you. They are built for doing. I'm also a big fan of these moleskin shirts right here. Really soft, really comfortable. And right now, for being a viewer or listener of the program, they're going to give you 20% off your first order if you go to shopdoer.com/forever. That's shopdoer.com/forever, spelled D-U-E-R. Don't forget that part, for 20% off your first order. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you watched last night's show so that you get the full, broad scope of all the trade possibilities. Well, we're still just kind of tip of the iceberg looking at all this stuff, right? But if you haven't checked that out, please do. That one's less likely, right? Because he's never done it. But man, did he have a reputation for a while of trading down in the first round. Sometimes, multiple times, and several times completely out of the first round altogether. But then a couple of things happened. 2017 and 2019 happened. In 2017, they traded down a couple of times all the way out of the first round. And then they selected Malik McDowell, who at the time looked like everything that Pete Carroll wanted in a defensive lineman. Years later, we would hear him reference what was happening in San Francisco in the early 2010s or the early 2020s with that defensive line, where they had all those guys that were big and long. And he referenced that as they were trying to rebuild that group that was weakened by the Frank Clark trade and then some of these mistakes. McDowell was a physical freak. He had all the traits you look for in a defensive lineman: the height, weight, speed, length, strength. But the off-field stuff was a concern. And it came back to bite him in record fashion. Like before they could even get him into camp, right? He had the really disastrous ATV accident and never really amounted to anything in the NFL. He attempted to come back a couple of years later with the Cleveland Browns and actually played pretty well. And then he got hurt again. There were some concussion issues and some lingering effects from the accident. Ever since then, Schneider stayed put. He has stuck and picked, or I guess if you want to make it rhyme, he sticked and picked. I know the grammar's not good, but it sounds better, right? Ever since then. 2017 was the Malik McDowell situation. 2019 was the year they once again traded down several times, not all the way out of the first round, but down far enough that they missed out again. They were looking for defensive linemen, and they completely whiffed on the bulk of that class. And it was a very, very good class. There were some guys in that class that they thought they could trade down and still get. Rashawn Gary was a guy that they were targeting with their native pick. He was selected much earlier than they expected. So they traded down hoping to still get Jerry Tillery. There were a couple other guys in that draft as well. Missed out on them. In fact, Tillery was sniped one pick before them. So they had to settle for LJ Collier out of TCU. And we know what happened. He never really amounted to much here in Seattle either. So you put those two things together, and he hasn't traded down since. Even after the Russell Wilson trade, when they had some bona fide, legitimate top 10 draft resources with which to play, he has stuck and picked best player available in every case since then. This year, trading down makes a little bit of sense, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. And as I promised you in the intro, I've got some specific trades based on the trade charts. We'll talk about that, what those mean, and how they differ a little bit. If you've never used them, I'll let you know where you can find those as well, and we'll have some fun with that. And then I'll take some questions and comments, and then I'm going to cook some bacon corn chowder. That's what I got waiting for me after the show. How do you feel about that? Please subscribe to the program, to the channel on YouTube. If you haven't already, hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm know that you like this video. And so we're going to push it out to more potential viewers. And if you hit that bell button, it'll notify you anytime there's a live stream or new content uploaded at any time. All the other ways you can support me and the show are linked down below in the description. So when we talk about trading on draft day, up, down, there's a number of resources that you can use that are easily readily available online and free. And some of these are actually used by the teams themselves. Every team's different, right? A couple years ago, there was a report that as many as 10 teams still use the Jimmy Johnson trade chart. So he was the first one to really develop this and then kind of put it out there so other people could use it. Essentially, it was just a way of assigning a point value to every single pick in the draft. And so that you could make trades based on, reasonable value calculated by one of the smartest guys to coach in the NFL for a long time. And so, very, very simply put, if you have the 18th pick and it's worth 1,000 points and someone wants to trade up and get 18, they have to put together a package of draft picks that equal 1,000 points, roughly. Now, there's variances. Some years, there's more, supply and demand is different. There is what has come to be known as the quarterback tax, which some people will estimate as anywhere between 10 and 20%, where if you're coming up specifically to get a quarterback, and this applies mostly to the top of the draft, you may have to pay 10 to 20% more than what the charts show. But then we started to get, as analytics became a bigger part of the NFL landscape, and I just saw a roster yesterday. In fact, I think I retweeted it, which listed every single analytics employee for every team in the NFL. And it was interesting to see because not every team employs the same size of staff. The Seahawks, for instance, and you hear John Schneider talking about analytics a lot. He's so intent on giving credit to his entire staff that almost every week on his weekly radio show this time of year on Seattle Sports 710, he works in, he'll name drop everyone that works for him, essentially. And he talks a lot about the analytics people, the sports science people. And he went into the analytics thing a couple of weeks ago in some depth. In particular, he referenced Rashad Penny in the year that he was drafted, where the analytics people were telling him that he was a guy that they should consider in the first round, that should be graded that high. And it didn't jibe with what Schneider had seen on tape. And so it caused him to go back to the tape again, looking at a specific aspect of his game, which was yards after contact. And it caused him to rethink that prospect and see him in a different light. Ultimately, they ended up choosing him in the first round. Ironically, the analytics that they were referencing also had to do with durability and a grade that they gave him on expected durability, which he was a workhorse in college, and then he couldn't stay healthy in the pros. So it doesn't always work. But the Seahawks employ 4 people in their analytics department, whereas the other end of the spectrum, the Cleveland Browns, and this shouldn't be surprising because, they hired Paul DePodesta, who came from that Billy Bean, Oakland A's Moneyball background. It was such a weird sort of ladder that he climbed to get to be in the NFL. But he has a staff of 10. Hasn't gotten him anywhere, but, that's not the point. And then along the way, some of these teams, in fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all to find that the Cleveland Browns and Paul DePodesta have come up with their own grading system on how to evaluate trades. But there's the Jimmy Johnson one. That's the OG. Then there's the Rich Hill chart, and it's been around for quite a while now. It's probably been around for about 20 years. And what it does is it takes actual trades, draft day trade, well, not necessarily on draft day, but draft trades, and then plugs them all in, compiles them, and in that way tries to come up with point values based on actual transactions. And if you look at the two charts and you look at potential trades up and down, they're not the same. And, I want you to keep that in mind, because we talk a lot about this on social media, right? Together. And I'll have a lot of people suggest things to me that just aren't realistic, because they're obviously not referencing the trade charts. Like, let's just trade. Somebody yesterday suggested we trade back a few picks with the Green Bay Packers and pick up another early second round pick. Well, that's never going to happen, even if they're coming up to get a quarterback. Like, it's just so out of whack with what the values on the trade charts are that it's just not going to happen. And so hopefully tonight too, and I've got graphics built for this too, so it's easy to see. It'll give you kind of an idea of what it takes to get day 2 picks by trading down, because that's what we all want, right? Like, you can move down a couple of picks. I remember there was a draft a couple of years ago, maybe it was 21 or 22, where it just seemed like there were a number of trades down in the first round by several teams that didn't come close to the trade charts, that were underpays, where you just weren't getting as much value. Teams were moving back 4 or 5 spots and getting 4th and 5th round picks. Sometimes that's just all that's available. There's another reference or another resource that you can reference that John Gilbert from Field Goals pointed out to me today that I wasn't aware of. It is on the Over the Cap website, and it's the Fitzgerald-Spielberger draft chart. And what they did is they actually built a calculator where you can plug in the two teams and you can plug in the draft, the pick that you want to trade, and it'll tell you what the value is, and it makes it real easy. I tried that today when I found out about it, and it was so far removed from what the other charts show that I'm not sure that it's working properly. Now, Brad Spielberger isn't with Over the Cap anymore. Maybe they haven't maintained it or updated it with the latest data. I don't know. But I was trying to move back to the Texans pick, which now off the top of my head, I can't recall. 25. And all that was getting me was a 7th round pick. And that's just not accurate either. If you want to reference these charts yourself, go to DraftTech, DraftTek, or just Google Jimmy Johnson trade value chart or Rich Hill trade value chart. And what's cool about these are both interactive. And so you can plug in the 3-letter abbreviation for the team you want to trade with, right? You can plug in KC. Sometimes it's a 2-letter. And it'll show you, it'll highlight on the chart, shows you all 7 rounds, every pick in each round, and it'll just highlight all Kansas City's picks. So you can see right away, they don't have a 3rd and a 4th, just as an example. So they're probably not a good trade partner. It's very, very cool. And then you can just kind of do the math. And so play around with that all you want. And what I always do whenever I'm doing these mock drafts, I always have 2 windows open. Well, 3. Because usually I have a big board or a draft prospect site as well. Now it's James Foster's, who was on the show the other day. Again, I'm just going to keep harping on this. One of my favorite interviews I've ever done. One of the smartest young men I've ever interviewed. He does the best, in my opinion, the best draft board out there. It's sortable. It has everything you could ever possibly think of to reference for 307 prospects. And I'll link it in the description after this live stream is done, like I've done the last couple of nights. Definitely check that out. So I'll have that open, and I'll have a trade chart, because I want to make sure if I'm playing around on the mock simulators with trading down that it's accurate. And keep that in mind. So the sims that offer you trades, right? Like PFF doesn't offer you trades. You have to do them the manual labor. You have to do the work. Pick a team, figure out the draft values, and do it yourself. PFN offers you trades. And occasionally, they're close to being accurate per the charts, but usually they're not. And so I'll do it myself, right? And just kind of figure it out that way. What I've always wanted is for a simulator to incorporate one of the charts. And Sportskeeda, the Tony Pauline site, played around with that idea a couple of years ago, but I've been to that mock simulator a couple of times this year, and I didn't see it, but it allowed you to pick a chart and then kind of it would use the values of that chart then to decide whether to approve or deny your trade. Whereas the flip side of that is PFF, for example, you can suggest trades or offer trades that are exact matches on the trade charts, and it'll reject it. So it's kind of all over the place. You sort of have to just do it manually. And that's what I did here today. So first things first, we'll go smallest to biggest. And some of these are very, very commonly suggested to me, and I'll see them online as well. And with each one, I'll try to give what I think is a pretty realistic reason that team might want to move up as well. So we start with the Steelers, and this one's obvious, right? This is what this would look like. They have to take a quarterback. And now we're hearing that they're doing all the work on all the quarterbacks, right? The latest rumor I saw today, and granted the source that I saw it from is one that tends to just, deal in hyperbole. They were suggesting that they like Jalen Milroe so much they might even take him at 21. I see that as being unlikely, but I think Jackson Dart would really be in play. And I also think Tyler Shuck would be in play for them if they value him as a first rounder. They are meeting with him or have met with him and done a private workout. They're doing their due diligence on Shuck because in their situation, him being an older prospect isn't as important because he's a guy that would get a shot to play as a rookie, with Mason Rudolph being the only quarterback on the roster there. And so if they're sitting there at 21 and they're afraid that someone is going to jump ahead of them to take Dart or Shuck, then 18 might be attractive to them. And this is what it would get Seattle based on the trade charts. Obviously, the 21st pick, they would get a 4th and a 7th. And that's off to the right. You can see that's a slight underpay by Pittsburgh. Seattle would essentially be leaving 1 point difference on the table. But that would be the value for moving back just 3 spots, a 4th and a 7th. Would you do that? Next one, Green Bay Packers at 23. Now, Green Bay typically isn't very aggressive in trading up in drafts. Maybe it's because that's just been the Packer way, which is part of John Schneider's DNA as well, and may help explain why he's hesitant to move up in the first round as well. This one's a little more attractive because this one, although it costs you more, gets you into day 2. Now, why might Green Bay want to trade up? Trenches. I think that's a weakness on their roster. Right? They let Josh Myers walk in free agency. They gave a bunch of money to Aaron Banks, which I think was just a massive overpay. If the Seahawks had given Aaron Banks $77 million like the Packers did, I would have flipped a lid, and not in a good way. As much as y'all want us to sign a veteran offensive lineman, I would have been really, really unhappy with that move. But they have a young offensive line. They have a bunch of guys that are getting close to the end of their rookie contracts, and I think they need some upgrades. Unfortunately, and ironically, I think if Green Bay were looking to move up to 18 to get an offensive lineman, there's a good chance that offensive lineman would be Gray Zabel, and so the Seahawks may say, thanks, but no thanks, we're going to take him ourselves. But this is what it would look like. And again, it's a slight underpay, but it's close enough. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of points in point value here. It's within 2. It's close enough. You'd send 18 and a 5th, one of the comp picks in the 5th. I believe that's the lowest of their 2. And you would get back 23 and 87. So now you would have 3 third-round picks, you would have what? 82, 87, and 92, right? Would you do that to move down 5 spots? Now, here's one that I've been playing around a lot with in my mock drafts. I haven't done one on the channel yet because I haven't done anything involving trading down, but mock draft Monday is coming up in 48 hours. So let's see how Monday goes. Maybe we'll do this one. The Houston Texans, it's an exact match. The Seahawks would move down to 25. They would get 25, obviously, and they would get the Texans' third rounder, number 79. So now you'd have 79, 82, 92. So now on day 2, you'd have 50, 52, 79, 82, and 92 to move down 7 spots. It's an exact match on the Rich Hill trade value chart. Would you do that? And for the Texans, I think, they've completely revamped their offensive line with some questionable veteran choices. And so I think, it would make sense for them to trade up if one of the tackles that they really like slips. Maybe a Josh Simmons coming off the injury, or a Kelvin Banks if they feel like he can stick at tackle. I think that would make some sense. But on the defensive side of the ball, too. Like they have a defensive head coach, and I think there's some needs up there up front on defense as well. And that's kind of the strength of the back half of the second round or the first round. And so I think I could see them being motivated. Plus, they're a team that just they were on the up a couple of years ago. Last year didn't really work out as well as they had hoped. They just changed their offensive coordinator. There's some scheme changes there. They just seem like a team that there's that division is ripe with opportunity. And so maybe a little bit of aggressiveness on draft day would be called for. Now, let's address kind of the elephant in the room, which is, well, Dan, all I keep hearing about this draft is how it's not as strong at the top. There aren't as many blue chip players, and that next year's draft is much stronger, and that this draft, talent-wise, is very even from 10, 15, all the way down into the 70s and 80s, all the way through day 2, certainly. And so wouldn't that just behoove teams to stick and pick? Yes. In fact, this is the latest we've ever gotten where there have been no first-round trades. Every single one of the 32 picks right now on the draft board is every team's native pick. It's never happened before. If we get to draft day, that's never happened before. This is the latest it's ever been. And so that may indicate just kind of a lack of willingness on teams' parts. But you get to draft day, and things become more clear. Right now, I have never seen a draft less than a month away where the consensus is so not a consensus. Like, even when you look at the consensus draft boards, and if you go to James Foster's, you'll see, and he takes 6 or 7 of the main draft boards, and you'll see that just the wide range. There's guys, you see it in these mock draft simulators, that sometimes you're trying to target at 18, and they're getting snapped up in the top 10, and then you'll do another draft, and they'll last until the second round. Or you'll see guys that are second round draft picks all day long on just about everybody's big board, but they're still available in the 80s and 90s. Like, there's such a lack of consensus this year. But as we get closer to the draft, there will be more clarity. Certainly there will be clarity among teams in knowing what they want and what they're willing to give up to get it. The other side of that argument is this. If this isn't as strong of a draft, and I will say this, side note, the more work I've done on this draft and the closer we get to it, the better I feel about it. And I sense that's the trend in the industry a little bit. But if talent is even, then I do think it lends itself to being creative, because every team has their own needs. You hear John Schneider say it all the time. We draft for our roster, not for the rest of the league. And so when these teams get to draft day and they see a player get to 18 that maybe they didn't think was going to be at 18, that they absolutely want. Maybe he has a first round draft pick or a draft grade on their board. That happens. Great example of that 2 years ago when the Seahawks took Derek Hall with the 37th pick, I think, early second round. They didn't have to think about that one very hard because they had a first-round grade on Derek Hall. Now, obviously, the other teams didn't, or at least the majority of the other teams didn't because they let him get to 37. So everyone's different. All it takes is a player getting to 18 that Pittsburgh or Green Bay or Houston says, I got to have. I'm going to make a call and just see if Seattle's willing to deal. And when these guys talk, John's going to ask him, who do you want? Who are you coming up for? Because if the answer is Gray Zabel, well, he's not going to make the move if that's the guy they want, just as an example. Now, just because I like to have some fun, right? I wanted to take a little bit of a bigger swing too. What if a team wants to get really aggressive? One of these teams that decides either misses out on Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders at the top of the draft, decides the other guys they don't value them highly enough to take that high, but they need a quarterback, and they're afraid to wait until day 2. They're afraid someone will trade up to the first pick overnight. Or they just want to get that 5th-year option for a young quarterback, especially someone that might be a little bit of a project, right? We haven't seen that happen in a long time. In fact, that hasn't happened since Lawrence Jackson came. Oh my goodness, Lamar Jackson. Jeez, you guys, see, this is what happens to my brain when I haven't eaten. Lamar Jackson was the last time that a team traded up into the first round, the end of the first round, to get a quarterback, in part just to get the player, but also to get that 5th-year option available, which is important with some of these young guys, right? With the salaries being what they are. I mean, imagine how much happier the 49ers would be right now if they knew they had the option of just doing a 5th-year option on Brock Purdy and delaying the decision on extending him another year, and not having to worry about whether to franchise him or not, right? So the team here would be the Giants, and this is what I came up with. And this works, but it's probably not that realistic, at least as it's written here. So the cost to go from 34, where they sit with their 2nd-round pick, and in this case, Cam Ward goes 1 to Tennessee. Shedeur Sanders goes 2 to Cleveland. They take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. Then they move back up. They have the extra 3rd, and they move from 34 to 18, and it would cost them 2 thirds, 65 and 99. And it's within 2 points. It's a little bit of an overpay for them. But again, the Seahawks could probably ask for more because of the quarterback tax. Remember that, right? Now, obviously, there's the option as well of offering future picks to offset this. Maybe they don't want to give up both their 3rd-round picks, and so they offer a 2nd next year. Usually they say that 1 year in the future is worth 1 higher round because you don't get to take advantage of that right now. You don't get to cash those chips today. And so they could offer 34, 65, and next year's 2. Would you take that? They probably won't, for exactly the reason that I've already mentioned, that next year's draft is considered to be projected to be much stronger at the top and potentially, depending on who comes out, who stays, who takes NIL money, et cetera, a better quarterback draft. And so, the Giants just went out and signed Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson. Weird. So, maybe they're content to just stay put and take a guy like, someone that falls. Take a guy like Will Howard or Quinn Ewers or Kyle McCord and try to develop him behind those veterans and look ahead to next year. So they're not likely to deal a pick next year unless they have conviction. That's a word I keep coming back to. If they know they can come up to 18 and get Jackson Dart, and they know that the Steelers are going to take him at 21, if they don't make this move, maybe they will be motivated to do that. Would you do that? Would you move all the way out of the first round? I haven't played with that scenario in a mock draft yet, but I will. Let's see what we got, guys. Dogzilla Monster, always here. You have near perfect attendance at Seahawks Forever. I really appreciate that, by the way. Shout out to you. What's a good reason for having even more picks? There's a couple, right? First of all, more bites at the apple. Seahawks have a very young roster, and a bunch of them are from the last 3 drafts. In fact, I think with Tyler Lockett being released, no, it was the DK Metcalf trade. He was 2019, right? And that closed the book on that draft. Like, the entire roster is made up of either players acquired from outside the organization or players who are on or near the end of their rookie contract. So they need, the draft isn't just for today. It's for next year and the year after and the year after too. You have to start stacking young talent, especially at a couple of different positions. But also the draft is a crapshoot. It's not an exact science. And so if you really want to find some blue chip players, which the Seahawks lack, we've talked about that a lot over the last few years. They have a lot of players we like, a lot of nice players. Do they have all pros? Do they have blue chippers? That's where they lack. And so the more opportunities, the more bites you take at that apple, the better the chances of finding one of those guys. But also, specifically, I think it gives you the luxury of taking a quarterback at some point. You add a couple of day 2, early day 3 picks. Now you can take a shot at a Quinn Ewers and see if you can develop him behind Sam Darnold over a couple of years. And if Sam Darnold establishes himself as a franchise quarterback moving forward, your long-term guy, fine, you don't need him. But if he doesn't, maybe you find a guy. But there's just a bunch of needs. I don't know that you can ever have too many picks. Now, in most years, I would hesitate to move down too much because I'd be afraid to miss out on a premium player. Last year is a great example of that. I did not want them to move off a 16 because I felt like there was a big ledge after that. Byron Murphy was the guy that I wanted them to take at 16. He's the guy that I put in my last mock draft. I think they did the right thing sticking and picking him. Now, if they had moved down a couple of spots, if Murphy wasn't there, Schneider said they had a couple of things working, Jared Verse would have been a fine consolation prize, right? But that doesn't always happen. I don't think this year is like that. And so moving off of 18, I think makes sense because I think it's very unlikely that there's going to be a player there at 18 that moving down to 21, 23, 25 is going to be a huge drop-off. That's just not this class. Pick a player. If you like Gray Zabel at 18, you think he's the only guy that we can take there that's going to fix this offensive line. Well, you can move down to 21 with Pittsburgh and you can get Donovan Jackson, who's just as good a player. That's just one example. I think there are other opportunities. There were some other trades I considered, by the way. I considered looking at Kansas City moving all the way up from 31, which would make sense for them, I think, for an offensive tackle or a wide receiver to get a guy that they really are in love with. The problem is they lack day 3 picks. They don't have a 5th or a 6th rounder. It would have cost them a 2 and a 4. I don't think they're going to be willing to do that. I think that was a little bit too rich for them. K Soon. Thanks for the super chat. Can a trade have a condition not to pick a guy? Not in writing. It's a handshake agreement. It's a gentleman's agreement, but they will talk about it. If there's a player there, like I think this becomes more pronounced the farther down you move. Like, so let's say the Texans call and they say, we want to move up to 18. John's going to say, who do you want? And if it's a guy that would be their fallback by moving down 7 spots, then they're not going to make the deal. It would most likely have to be a position group that they're not even considering. And also then they can kind of, because they do mock drafts themselves, lots of them. And they're constantly speculating, okay, what's going to happen between 18 and 25? We're pretty sure this team's going to take, Pittsburgh's going to take a quarterback. This team's going to take this. This team's going to take that. This team's taking a wide receiver. So we're safe there. So they'll look at it and go, okay, we're moving down 7 spots. 2 teams out of those 7 we think are in the market for an interior offensive lineman. So if the Texans are telling us that's what they're moving up for, even if it's the guy we don't prefer, might not make that trade because now the margin for error just gets so narrow. Now it only leaves one team in those next 6 has to take your guy. But if it's a whole different thing, it's like, no, we're coming up for a corner. We're coming up for Ravel from East Carolina. We're coming up for Ted McMillan. Okay. So then they can look at their board, projecting where they're projecting. It's a calculated risk. It's always going to be a risk. But it's not just shooting darts. It's not just blindly taking shots. There's kind of a method to everything that they do. Shane Turner, how you doing, buddy? How are things down under? Thanks for the super chat. I'd trade back to the early second if players are similar value. Get 2 extra bites of the apple and a pick for next year when the QBs are better. Again, I don't think anyone's going to be willing to trade a draft pick from next year's draft. You get into day 3, it's a different story. But everything we hear about next year's draft, in particular the quarterbacks, but not just the quarterbacks, is that teams are going to hold on to those picks pretty tightly. I don't think that's in the cards, right? Because that Giants scenario that I threw up there at you, in a typical year, here, let me get rid of this. If this was considered a stronger draft, at least on par with what teams are expecting to happen next year, then Seattle could ask for a future one to make a move like this significant. They could say, okay, just give us 34 and next year's one and we'll do it. I would. Maybe they will. Like, Joe Shane's on thin ice. Like, I can't believe he didn't get fired off of last offseason. And so there is going to be a little bit of desperation there. Brian Daboll may be on thin ice. If the Giants go, 3-14, they're cleaning house. And so maybe there is some desperation. And if they're moving up, that's why I wanted to play around with this scenario, because this might be the one team, because in this hypothetical, they're moving up to 18 to get a quarterback that they have conviction about, that they think is worth this value. So just as an example, again, if it's Jackson Dart or maybe it's Tyler Shuck, the Giants are another team that I think Shuck makes sense for, because there would be an opportunity to play early. And so the age just doesn't matter as much. If they're like, I got to go get that guy, he's not going to be there at 34. Let's go get him. We don't have to worry about how good the quarterback class is going to be next year, because we believe in this guy. And they've done all the work on all these quarterbacks, and they continue to. So maybe there is a world where the Giants go, we'll give you 34. They'd probably start out offering 65 or 99. John's going to go, no. Because I know you have to come up to me, or Pittsburgh's going to take him at 21. Or guess what? I got Pittsburgh on the other line. So I'll just do that deal with them. I mean, maybe we could see something like that. I don't expect it. I'd be shocked, but crazier things have happened. Teams have gotten desperate, right? Not apples to apples, because they were building things nicely already there. It was kind of the cherry that put them over the top. But remember when the Chiefs went from 27 to 10 to get Mahomes? Look back at that trade. I should have queued that up. It's shocking how inexpensive that deal was 7 years ago, 8 years ago. That same deal today would cost, well, what did the Trey Lance trade cost? People frame it as 3 first-round picks, but it's a pick swap this year and then 2 future firsts. And they moved up, 10 spots? The price has gone up. Inflation has definitely impacted the quarterback draft market. All right, guys, let's see what we got here. Dusty says, I've been a proponent of trading out of the first round completely. The meat and potatoes of this draft is in days 2 and 3. Add another couple of picks and you can really transform this team overnight. Agreed. I could see it. And the other thing it does is it would give you so much more ammo. And this kind of goes back to another part of the answer that I could have included for Dogzilla, is it gives you more flexibility to then move up too. You trade completely out of the first, you pick up a bunch of extra picks. You're sitting there on day 3 or day 2 with like 5 or 6 picks instead of the 4 that they have now. And now it's like, okay, we want to move from 50 up to 40 because we think someone's going to take Tate Ratledge. We don't think he's going to get to 50, and that's a guy that we believe in. Now you can move up and go get that guy. So it gives you more ammo. You're probably not going to trade all the way out of the first round, get to 13 picks, like in that Giants scenario, and use all 13. You're going to come up a couple of times. And as much as John Schneider's first round trade downs haven't really worked out, And maybe that's another reason why he hasn't done it since 2019. Maybe it's not just as simple as, well, it didn't work out for us with the LJ in 17 and 19. It could be the advent of and just the larger role that analytics has taken in the organization too. Those people might be in his ear saying, no, just stay where you are. Like, the data shows you're going to get a better player than you would if you move down, and we don't think you should do that. That could be a part of it as well. I'm glad you brought this up, because I did want to mention it in case any of you aren't aware. Osiris says, thanks for getting the audio versions back on Apple and Spotify. Took about 3 weeks. I'm so sorry that took so long, you guys. The Blue Wire Network switched the audio podcasts from, we were using Spotify for creators, and they or Megaphone. We were using Megaphone, which I think is owned by Spotify now, and switched it over to just a different hosting platform called Simplecast, which I love. It's so much better. It makes it so much more streamlined, and it's easier. As soon as I'm done here, I'll go over, process the file, clip it up a little bit, and it'll be posted within 5 minutes, where it used to take almost a half an hour. But it just, the data transfer didn't go smoothly. And Spotify took a while, but Apple, there were all sorts of problems, actually. It just wasn't picking up the feed. And then for a minute there were actually 2 different versions of the show on Apple, and you had to resubscribe to the new one. But if we had just gone that way, I would have lost all the history, all the ratings and the reviews and everything. So everything now is back up on both platforms. Some of the other platforms we're still working on. Amazon isn't up yet. It will be. Little by little, we'll take care of all that stuff as we go. But in the meantime, if you're like an Amazon listener, you can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and everything is up to date. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And thank you for the patience. You guys, that was a pain in the butt. I see you. I see all the comments about the offensive line, and I'm just, honestly, you guys, I'm tired of talking about it. So unless it's directly relative to specific draft scenarios, yeah, we're just not going to have the offensive line discussion right now. Let's see. John McGrath, such a consistent viewer. I really appreciate that, John. Not a fan of trading back, but if they can do it and still get someone like Zabel or Grant and then get Jackson or Ravel with the next pick, then I'm all for it. That's an interesting viewpoint as well. And again, just another layer to the answer for Dogzilla's question about why would you. There's a couple of players in this draft that carry some risk, but that have a ton of upside. And if the Seahawks like that player, but they're concerned, having extra picks can alleviate some of that risk. Siobhan Ravel out of East Carolina would probably be the best cornerback in this draft. And if he hadn't gotten hurt, torn his ACL early in the season last year, might be talked about as a top 10, 12, 15 pick. Like, think prototypical Pete Carroll, long, tall, physical corner. It was really unfortunate he got hurt. So there's an example, right? The Seahawks actually chose not to select Jeffrey Simmons in the 2019 trade that I talked about that had such a great defensive line class, defensive line and edge. He was a guy that they missed out on by trading down, didn't want to take the risk like the Texans did and take him, or Titans did, and it certainly worked out for the Titans. So if there's a guy like that, Josh Simmons might be another example, although I think his medicals have come back pretty clean, and I don't think he's going to get out of the top 20. Shamar Turner, not Shamar Stewart, but his teammate from Texas A&M. Shamar Turner is a defensive lineman that was highly, highly productive and looked like a first-round pick, but he had a broken leg 2 years ago, played with a rod in it last year, and it didn't heal properly, and that kept him from participating in the Senior Bowl and the Combine and everything else. That's a particularly sticky one for the Seahawks because we've been there, done that with Darryl Turner, right? Darryl Taylor with Darryl Turner. Gosh, I just aged myself there, didn't I? I bet a bunch of you young Seahawk fans, Don't even know who I'm talking about. Anyway, Darrell Taylor had the rod in his leg and it kept him out his whole rookie year. They might just not want to touch that, but that's a good example of maybe a guy that they're not sure of. Or maybe it allows them to take a little bit of a risk on a player that has some character issues in their background and they think there's enough information to warrant taking them now that's in their rearview mirror and that they're doing the right things and doing things the right way. It's a good point. It would allow you to be a little bit more risky maybe on day 2 than the Seahawks typically like to be. Now, I said I wouldn't talk offensive line, but draft specific. Bill Anderson says, if they pick 2 offensive line in the first 4 rounds, I'll be happy. I'm glad he said 4 rounds. I see so many mock drafts that have 2 interior offensive linemen being taken in the first 5 picks. And I know one of my favorite journalists and content creators in this world, in this Seahawks world, Rob Staten, who I have a ton of respect for. I know he just did his mock draft last week, and he had him taking Zabel and Ratledge, I believe. And certainly those are 2 players I love. If they were to do that, I would eat my words and accept it and be happy about it because I love both those players. I just think it would be a gross misuse of draft resources considering all the guys we've drafted in the last 2 years, some of whom are very talented, and I'm not ready to give up on them yet. If you take 2 offensive linemen in the first 5 picks, it's going to cost you a good corner, potentially, or a good wide receiver, or a good edge player. And those are all 3 positions that I feel fall off a very significant ledge after day 2. Whereas interior offensive line, there's so many guys on day 3 that I like. And so I'd rather just kind of flip-flop those. So you say first 4 rounds? Absolutely. And I will say this, I know a bunch of you have heard me say this several times. My ultimate plan as it stands right now with 10 picks is I'm taking 3 in the draft. I am. I'm taking a guard early, potentially at 18, that I have no doubts about. That's a plug and play upgrade, better than anything I could have got on the free agent market, better than anything I can trade for right now, cheaper, under contract control, 5th-year option, all of that. I'm taking a stud guard in the first 3 picks that I know is going to start from day 1. And then I'm letting the competition sort itself out at center and guard. But then I'm taking 2 other things on day 3, and I prioritize these highly. 4th round makes a lot of sense, Bill. I want a guy that can play guard or center, and there's a bunch in this class that fit that bill. Jackson Slater, the Bellevue kid, is one. Clay Webb is another. Luke Kander is another. There's a few others as well. Marcus Bowe is another as well. And then I'm taking a swing tackle. A guy that I see starter upside in, that I think might be able to play either side. And so next year he can basically take the role that you signed Josh Jones to take this year, the Stone Forsythe, George Fant role, where in a pinch they can play either side. But also a guy that you think can start at right tackle at some point if you decide to move on from Abe Lucas. So those are 3 things that I'm taking in just about every single draft. Now, the last couple of days, I've tweaked that. I'm taking the guard early, and then I'm taking Chase Lunt from Connecticut in the 4th round. He's a tackle, and he can play tackle, but he can also come inside to guard. He's one of the best run blockers in this class. He's an outside zone fit. He is one of the nastiest. He seeks blocking dummies out on the field, and he arrives with a purpose, and he does damage, and he punishes defenders. And the thing I really like about him is I do think, even though the arms are slightly short, I think he can stick at right tackle. So you play him at guard early in his career, but he's a guy that maybe can succeed Abe Lucas if you have any concerns about that knee long term. Let's see. I just like to throw one in like this every once in a while. Dakra. Hey, everyone. Hey, Dakra. How are you? David Hatcher. Kenneth Grant at 18 sounds good to me. If I've done 100 mock drafts so far, and it's probably closer to 200, but just for, round even numbers. If I've done 100 mock drafts so far, Kenneth Grant's been the pick at 18 in 60 of them at least. He's my favorite pick at 18. He's my Byron Murphy this year. I think the sky's the limit. I think he has all pro upside as just an absolute machine. He's big enough to play the nose, but his athletic traits are dynamic enough that he can play anywhere from 0 to 1 to 3 technique. I think he can play the 5 tech. The idea of him and Byron Murphy being next to each other for the next 4 to 5 years, with Leonard Williams there as well, and Jaron Reed, that just, now you're building something, you're adding strength to strength, and you can build a dominant defensive line so that Mike McDonald can have a top 5 defense every year while this offense is being restructured and growing and catches up to the defense. That's my favorite pick at 18 because I think he has the most upside of anyone that'll be there at 18. And because of all that depth on day 2 in the interior offensive line, you can still turn around at 50 and get a really good player. Or if you have to move up slightly from there, you can do that. But I like that combination better. And that's what you have to play with combinations, right? Do the mock draft sims. Take Gray Zabel at 18 if he's there, or Donovan Jackson, or Kelvin Banks, whoever you like, right? And then I think you'll agree with me. You'll see that at 50, 52, 82, there's nobody like Kenneth Grant that's still going to be there. The difference between Kenneth Grant and what you're going to get on the interior defensive line in the second round, that gap is way wider than the gap would be between, take your pick, whichever guard you like at 18, and the guard you can get at 50. The difference between Gray Zabel and Tate Ratledge is not nearly as wide of a gap as it would be, in my opinion, from Kenneth Grant to the next defensive tackle that you could get at 50. Let me just shoot down to the bottom here and get some of the newer stuff. Shane Turner again. How about moving back into the first for 2 players? You can absolutely do that. Absolutely do that. Now, again, this gets into the value in this particular draft, right? But I'll use the example from 2 years ago. Again, if the Seahawks stick and pick at 18, let's say they take Kenneth Grant, and they get down to 25 again, and maybe the Texans are looking to move back because they have more needs, or there's nobody that they like at 25. All the first round grades on their board are gone, but the Seahawks still have one, like they did with Derek Hall 2 years ago, where they had him graded in the first round, but he made it into the second, which means most of the other teams, if not all, didn't have a first round grade on him like the Seahawks did. But if they're sitting there and they're like, hey, wait a minute, our guy is still there at 25. Donovan Jackson's still there at 25, or Gray Zabel falls. I keep using the same names, but these are the guys that we all like, right? Absolutely, you can move up. And that's a fun one. I'll play around with that scenario for the next show, or I'll put it on Twitter or something. I'd want to take some time with that, with the trade charts, and play around. But that's another advantage to having all those extra picks, especially on day 2. There's a lot of value there. And so you could move up, from 50. Well, God, that would cost you a lot. Screw it. Let me just pull up one of the trade charts and do it. Sometimes, as much as I like to keep these live shows as concise as I would a pre-recorded show, sometimes I forget. These are live shows, and they're a conversation. We're hanging out, right? Okay. So based again on the Rich Hill trade chart, which is my favorite, let's say they want to go from 50 all the way up to, God, who'd be willing to trade down and get out of the first round altogether? Let's say Philly, just because it would be the most modest of the moves, right? They're obviously sitting there at 32. Okay? So they want to move from 50 up to 32. Howie Roseman's like, I want picks. I don't really value anyone that's on the board right now at 32, but I want to add some extra day 2 picks because there's a lot of value there. They have their 4 native picks in rounds 1 through 4, and then they have a bunch of comp picks, so they have 4 fifths. So to go from 50 up to 32, so 32 is worth 184. Gonna have to bust the calculator out for this one, you guys. It's worth 184 points on the Rich Hill chart. The Seahawks 50th pick is 115. So that's a difference of 69 points, which is going to cost you so 82. Your first third is 54. Leaves you with 15, 137. So it would cost, this isn't that bad. I'm glad you brought this up. So it would cost, if the Seahawks wanted to move from 50 up to 32 to get a second first rounder, it would cost them a third and a fourth, 82 and 137. They would still have both of their second rounders, 50 and 52, and they would still have 92. The pick that they got in the 82 is the pick they got in the Geno Smith trade, right? Would you do that? Would you trade one of your thirds and your fourth, would leave you without a fourth, to go from 50 to 32 to get 2 first-round players? I don't think that a move like that makes a lot of sense unless you're targeting a quarterback. It's going to cost you more, which Seahawks have plenty of cap space. You get the 5th-year option, but I think it makes sense with a quarterback, but not really with any other position. Hey, Dave, how you doing? Thank you so much for the generous super thanks or super chat, whatever it's called. Thank you. I appreciate the donation very much. You're my most generous and consistent supporter. Thank you very much for that. It means a great deal to me. Great show, Dan. Should be a very interesting draft and go a long way toward getting this team where they're trying to go. Go Hawks. I can't wait for this draft. I think I'm as excited about this draft as any I can recall. Maybe the one after the Russ trade, where they have the 2 first, I guess the year after the Russ trade, right? Where we had 5 and 20. That was a lot of fun. All the extra second round picks make a lot of fun, but also the unpredictability of this draft. I have no idea what's going to happen. Now, I usually don't do a full first round mock and submit it like a bunch of the other big time analysts do in the country. That's something Staten's very good at, by the way, and they track that stuff over the course of years, and he does really well at it. I'll probably take a shot at one this year, but my goodness, I think the accuracy level on the first round this year is going to be much lower, even for some of the best mock drafters out there, than it usually is. But to me, that means drama, that means excitement, that means unpredictability, and we can all enjoy it together because it's a great opportunity to remind you all then that I'm going to do a live watch party through the entirety of the first round and the entirety of the second round together. Why wouldn't I, right? The first round is always fun, and then day 2, we have 4 picks. Like, the Seahawks have an opportunity to really dominate and own day 2. It's going to be a ton of fun. I can't wait. Let's see. Yeah. Andy Anderson says, I hope John drops down and grabs more picks. In my mock drafts, I dropped back 3 times and altogether had 14 to 15 picks. I do that too sometimes. It's fun. Sometimes I'll take a bunch of the trades that are offered to me on the PFN app just because I want to load up on them. And what happens with a lot of these mocks, especially if you use the same ones over and over again, is the big boards are the same. And so there's always players that I can never get because they're snapped up before I can take them. And it would be too much of a reach to take them earlier, which is not unrealistic. Teams actually have that exact same dilemma on draft day. And as they're working through the draft, there are players that they fall in love with that are caught in no man's land, But I think with what we just, and I'm so glad that now I can't remember who asked the question. I'm so sorry, but I'm glad you guys had me work up that scenario of what it would take to get back into the first round, because what makes that really exciting is you talk about, you can move up in the second round. Let's say they just want to go from 50 to 40. New Orleans wants to trade out of 40 because they need to stockpile a crap ton of picks because they need to get younger and cheaper so they can get out of the salary cap hell. Well, that's only, 115 to 149. So that's 34 points, which would cost them 92 is 43 points. It's an overpay. You can play around with some later picks too and do a pick swap, but let's just say they're willing to overpay. Like, just as a rule of thumb, they can use the second of their 2/3 to move up 10 spots in the second to get into the top 10 on day 2. They have, it's one of the things I like. While I do miss the days of the draft being spread out over just 2 days, I kind of like this format because it really does lend itself to a whole nother draft on day 2. And it gives these teams a chance to kind of evaluate and make phone calls and look at what's left on the board and look at who's picking. And there's a lot of negotiations. And I think while I don't think there's going to be a lot of trading within the first round, I do think day 2 could be crazy, and the Seahawks are going to be right in the middle of that. So yeah, those extra picks absolutely give you more ammo to do that, which, to someone's earlier point, if you do move down from 18 and you pick up some extra picks, then you can use those to package and move back up. Because there are a lot of players, every time I do these mock sims, in that, between 19 and 49 that I have no shot at. Landon Jackson's a really good example of one, the edge from Arkansas. He's always gone at the top of the second round. I could just never get him, and I think 18's too high for him. That's just one example. But, yeah, it's going to be so much fun, you guys. You can get a little too carried away. You don't want to draft 15 players. They're just, I don't know. That just seems a little much. But if anyone can do it, the Seahawks can. They have that cap space. They're not going to spend it. I don't think, between now and the start of OTAs, at least, they might extend some players and dip into that a little bit. But I think it allows them to be really aggressive at the trade deadline if they have some cap space. Roll it into next year. Be really aggressive in free agency next year because they don't have a lot of big cap hits next year. It's going to be a fun year. I know. I just keep saying it. It's going to be fun. Fun. Drink every time I say fun. Robert Hale, thank you so much for the super thanks. Thanks, Dan. Move down in the first, move up in the third. Let's dominate. Best player available before the quality falls off a cliff. Let's play around with that scenario. And actually, let me do this. We're not in a hurry, are we? Let's do this. Take that out of there. Hold on, you guys. Give me a second here. Let's just share the screen, shall we? Boom. This is the trade value chart. That's what it looks like. Okay. I guess I can still fit that in there. Boom. So I know it's kind of small, but you can see these green boxes. So left to right, first round, second round, third, and then the picks top to bottom. The green boxes are all the Seahawks picks. I'll just show you how this works. So you want to trade up in the third round? Okay. Let's say, again, let's just use New Orleans as a good example because it's about a 10-pick jump. It's pretty aggressive, but it's reasonable. So you see right here, if you can see my cursor, you can't really. Wait, oh, there's the big cursor. There we go. Can you see it now? Nope, you can't. So if you want to move from 82 to 71, okay, near the top of the third round to get a guy that's falling, you weren't expecting him to be there, you want him. Maybe one of the receivers or one of the corners, because after day 3, both of those position groups get pretty thin. So the 82nd pick is worth 54 points. New Orleans' 71st pick is worth 68. It's a difference of 14 points. You go down to your fourth rounder at 137. It's worth 16 points. It's a 2-point overpay. Maybe you have New Orleans kick you back a 7th rounder as well. But you can move from 82 to 71 by kicking in that 4th rounder. Would you do that to get a better player? It's a fun scenario, isn't it? Even on day 3, they don't want to sit and wait all that long. You have to wait overnight. There's a couple guys that get the 4th round. Let's say Chase Lunt, who I always see in the 4th round, is sitting there, and they're worried that he's not going to make it through 33 picks. And they're sitting down there at 137 because it's a 4th round comp pick, so it's at the end of the round. And they want to move up from 137 to, let's just use New Orleans again. They want to move all the way up to 112. 29 points for New Orleans pick at 112, 16 for the Seahawks. That's 13 points. Well, your 5th rounder is worth 9. Your 2 5th rounders are worth 9 and 8, so that's a total of 17 points. That would allow you to move as high as the top of the 4th round. So that's kind of cool. Would you trade all the way up to the first pick in the 4th round, the first pick on day 3. You spend the night making phone calls. You get a hold of Tennessee. They want to trade down and pick get a bunch of extra picks because they're rebuilding, right? They already got their quarterback in Cam Ward. They need to add some pieces. If you offered them 172 and 175 to move from 137 all the way to 103, like you'd be emptying the chamber. You wouldn't have another pick until the 7th round. But it's doable. It's doable. Just, as an example. What we should do before the draft is I'm going to give you guys a homework assignment. Okay? Let's do this. And I'll make a note of it. Not next week, because next week I'm going to do my positional rankings. My top 5s at every position group, top 5 Seahawk fits, not just favorite players, but top 5 players that I like as fits for the Seahawks. So the week after that, as we get closer to the draft, I want y'all, and by y'all, I mean anyone watching, but also mostly, those of you that are here on a regular basis, that really like to geek out and nerd out with me on this kind of stuff. Play around with these trade charts. You don't have to use Rich Hill. You can use Jimmy Johnson if you like it. Jimmy Johnson's big numbers. They're more square numbers. It's a little bit easier in your head to just kind of do the math or whatever. But play around with it. Come up with some of your favorite trade scenarios. And then we'll have a live show where I'll have you send those to me. And, a couple days in advance. So keep an eye on Twitter if you don't follow me there already, at Seahawks Forever, but I'll also post it on the community page here on the YouTube channel, which also subscribe. And I'll pick like the best 4 or 5. I'll build graphics just like I did, and we'll put them in there. You can involve players if you want to. I didn't do that today. I know I've seen some suggestions for it. I didn't do that today because it's just so hard to assign value to that. It's really hard to know. But get working on that. You've got about a week and a half, and then keep your eyes peeled for when I invite you to send those to me. And we'll pick the best ones. And maybe I'll even come up with something as a prize. So I can come up with. Anyway, where was I? Oh, Dave gifted 5 Seahawks Forever podcast memberships. So take advantage of that. If you can, there will be some membership only or members only content coming up over the next couple of weeks. We will do a pre-draft members only live stream, among other things. Some of the videos will be uploaded. When I do my positional rankings next week, I'll make those videos. Those will be pre-recorded videos for the most part. I think 1 or 2 of them might be live, but the pre-recorded ones, I'll make them available for the first few hours to members only. So there are some perks there. Also, it allows you to do starred comments, so you can jump to the head of the line and get you in first. So thank you again, Dave. Dr. Strange says, I doubt they take a wide receiver or tight end at 18. I think it's not likely they take a receiver at 18. Now, this is interesting. There was a report today on Twitter that, according to some of the buzz at the Ohio State Pro Day yesterday among scouts and coaches and personnel that were there, they think there's going to be a run on wide receivers that begins with the Seahawks at 18. Now, the way it was worded, some people took it as, they think the Seahawks are going to take a receiver at 18. I don't necessarily, that's not how I read it. I read it as that they see that's where the run is, and the Seahawks might be open for business. Like, okay, Ted May's been all over the place, the big, tall wide receiver out of Arizona, right? He was a top 10 pick for months, and then his stock dropped. He's not explosive enough. He's not sudden enough. His route running's not good enough. The effort's not always there. And so then he kind of dropped, and now it seems like he's back in the top 10 again. But let's say that happens, right? All these teams trying to get in on the strength of this draft, which is both trenches and edge, in my opinion. Maybe a receiver doesn't go till 18. I've talked about the possibility that this could be 2 years ago when they got JSN at 20, first receiver off the board. Now, that's a rare opportunity. You're sitting there at 20, and at the time, a lot of people didn't like that pick. You like it now? But he was the number one receiver on their board. That was great value at 20. They could be sitting there at 18, and Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, Emeka Ibuka, they're all there. In which case, I think Schneider would be taking offers on that pick as opposed to taking one for a couple of reasons. One, I don't see anyone in this draft at the receiver position that I believe has bona fide wide receiver one upside. Even the best ones in this class, I think, are all twos. But there's some really cool depth in the day two group. There's 10 or 12 guys in rounds 2 and 3 that I could be really excited about, that I don't think they're that far behind the group that I mentioned that'll be in play at 18. So I do think that would be an opportunity for the Seahawks to leverage that pick. So I'm going to play around with those scenarios. I'm going to consider the possibility. It's not going to shock me if it happens. I don't think it'll happen. I think it's unlikely to happen. Tight end's a different story. We've talked about Tyler Warren. I don't think he's getting to 18, but if he does, I think they sprint to the podium. Or, as I talked about in last night's show, I think he's a guy that if he slips into the early teens, I think John works the phones and he looks at moving up. And if you didn't watch that last night, go check it out because I put together trade scenarios for every pick between 18 and 10 and what it would cost to move up. For a guy like specifically Tyler Warren or Will Campbell was my other target that I thought might maybe slip a little bit because of the questions about length and that they would jump all over if there was an opportunity to. But Colson Loveland will, I think, be in play at 18. You have to be satisfied with the medicals. Labrum surgery. He's probably not going to be ready for week 1 or at least not be 100%. Might be a pup candidate to start the season. But he is an elite tight end. And if there were no medical concerns, if shoulder was 100% healthy, I don't think there's any world where he even gets to 18. I think we have 2 tight ends drafted in the top 15. If Colson Loveland is there at 18, I think he's absolutely in play. And you as a fan, if they take Colson Loveland at 18, set aside your predisposition about positional value at that spot or whatever. You're talking about an all-pro level tight end and something to really get excited about. And also there would be enough depth at all the other positions you need on day 2 to address it and at pretty equal talent level. But I know Seahawks fans would be freaking out. And this is one of the downsides of the 3-day draft format. Is if you don't get what you want on day 1, then you have to try to sleep that night with all that anxiety, right? Remember 2 years ago when the Seahawks went into the 2023 draft, absolutely needing defensive line. And they didn't address it on days 1 or 2. And we were all in major freak out mode. Then day 3, they picked Cameron Young and Mike Morris, and we felt pretty good about that. But 2 years later, neither of those players have become a contributor at all. Just another example. Nathan Roberts says, I hear Pete wants K9. What would he be worth? I think I know the report that you're talking about, and it is not a legitimate report. Pete want K9. There's probably a bunch of players on the Seahawks roster that Pete would want because he's familiar with them. But the specific report that made the rounds a couple of days ago that you're talking about was a classic case of clickbait and one of my biggest pet peeves ever. There is a channel out there. I won't mention it by name because I don't like talking shit. So I'm going to what's the verbal equivalent of a subtweet? A sub-statement? You guys will probably figure out who I'm talking about. It's a massive channel. It's a national network, but they do individual teams too, and there's a Seahawks-focused one. They have like 70,000 subscribers, of which I am quite sure 50,000 of them are they paid for subscribers. They signed up. There's no way this channel has 70,000 subscribers, and the way you can tell is because if you go into the comments for any given video, you'll see 70% of the comments are, what a bunch of clickbait BS, because it's misleading, deceptive headlines. Seahawks about to make big trade for star pass rusher. Or in this case, Seahawks about to trade Kenneth Walker to Raiders. So you click on it, you want to watch it. It's a flashy thumbnail and it's a legitimate site, or legitimate, at least you see that it has 70,000 subscribers and a bunch of views. Although, and this is another way, God, you guys me on a tangent. I don't like talking shit. But it drives me crazy because I take a lot of pride in what I do, and I have a journalistic background, right? I'm not just a guy that started a YouTube channel one day on a whim. Like, I have a degree, I'm trained as a journalist and walked away from it, and this has given me an opportunity to get back into it. But that's still how my brain thinks. If you have 70,000 subscribers, your videos aren't going to get 2,500 views. I get more views with 8,700 subscribers than this channel does most of the time with 70,000. Anyway, but then you'll go watch the video, and the report that he's referencing isn't a report. It's not from Ian Rappaport. It's not from a local beat writer. It's not from anyone on ESPN. It's not from Daniel Jeremiah or Bucky Brooks. Or it's not. It's some blogger or someone like me, some content creator, spitballing. And they make it sound like a legitimate report to get clicks. The example, another example of this would be, and I apologize for the tangent, I should make an animated graphic that I put up, because if you've watched me long enough, you know I can go on tangents that says tangent alert. I should have a tangent alert. That was a tangent within a tangent. But a good example would be if I put this back up, and this show is about this, right? And then someone took this and ran with it on another channel and said, Texans preparing to move up to 18 and trade up with the Seahawks. No, it's just me doing hypotheticals. So anyway, I hope you don't think that I was picking on you. I just wanted to get that out there. Think twice before you click on a report, and don't believe everything you see. But sometimes, and this is what sucks about this. Sometimes you have to click on it. That's where they get you. You have to click on it to find out it's not real. If you follow me on Twitter and you want to know which channel I'm talking about, DM me. That way you'll know you can avoid that channel. Anyway. Okay, Rainwater Game says drop it so we can avoid it. Do it in the DMs. I don't want to do it here. I just don't. The guy stole one of my pictures that I took at a Seahawk game once and used it on his background. And it's just, don't get started. Also, the whole presentation and it's all just fake and affected. Dr. Strange, I'm not going to put you up on the screen, but you are correct. And I really like your nickname, your play on words that you use. Yeah. Okay. Enough of you in the comments. You know exactly who I'm talking about. David Miller, better scheme fit, Tyler Booker or Gray Zabel? Zabel 100 times out of 100. In fact, as good of a player as Booker is, and as epic of a leader as he is, I don't think he's going to be very high on the Seahawks board because he's not a scheme fit. He'll be on their board because he's a clean prospect. He's a big-time leader, locker room guy, just the mentality, everything is there. He just isn't a natural fit for the scheme that they are committing to. And so, but Gray Zabel is. And much as I had dismissed, let's talk about Gray Zabel for a second. Tangent alert. I had kind of dismissed the idea of the Seahawks taking Zabel and wasn't running mock simulators with that scenario at all for quite a while. Because I thought, as I'd said earlier, I thought it just made more sense to go with another position in the first round and then circle back to interior offensive line at 50 or 52. And Zabel's not going to be there then. But the more I watch him, the more I read what's being said about him. And it's impossible to know if he's going to be there at 18. I see mock drafts from some of the the big guns out there, right? The ones that are connected and talk to scouts and front office personnel and have sort of their finger on the pulse and have an idea of how teams feel about these players. I see him being mocked in the top 15, but then I'll see others where he's still available in the second round. I've been tweeting some screenshots the last couple of days of Bob McGinn's articles. And if you don't know about Bob McGinn's articles, and before the draft, I'm going to do a whole episode just on McGinn's takes. He does a position group at a time. He's 5 position groups in right now. And what he does, he's so connected. He wrote for the paper in Green Bay for many, many years. He's a veteran, one of the best NFL reporters out there over the last 20, 30 years. And he's so connected, he will do these detailed scouting reports on like the top 10 prospects at every position. And he will include anonymous quotes from scouts. And it is some of the best football writing and reading you're ever going to find, because it is like peel back the curtain stuff. And you'll find scouts that say Gray Zabel's a 3rd rounder, NFL scouts. One scout said that Tate Ratledge was a 4th or 5th rounder. One scout said Kyle McCord can't play. Like, you get those kinds of variances. That's why when I talk about these trade scenarios and stuff, all it takes is one team thinking differently than another team to value someone to come up and get them. But the one thing that also was pointed out, I've also read other places, is that Gray Zabel, if there was an award for the player who won the interview process during draft season, it's Gray Zabel. That every single team that's met with him has been blown away by the makeup and the character of the person and the football mentality. And what does that scream? That screams Seahawks. And then I got really inspired reading Rob's mock draft the other day. I do think if Zabel's there at 18, I think he's a Seahawk. As much as I just told you that Kenneth Grant's the guy that I think makes the most sense from a value standpoint. I just think he embodies everything that they want. I think he would make the offseason make sense, that they took their shot at Will Fries. They didn't value any of the other guys. They looked at all of them. They kicked the tires on all of them. They didn't like him better than the guys they have on hand. And I think that their decisions to not sign guys have been validated, right? They didn't sign Tevin Jenkins. He goes to the Browns and signs a backup deal. They didn't sign Dylan Radins, even though they brought him in for a visit. He goes to New Orleans, where he's not a starter if the season started today. So I think they've been validated there. But also, and we keep hearing John talk about it in his kind of thinly veiled shots at some of the fans and stuff, but I think in his way, he's saying, trust me, I'm going to do it this year. I think they know they can get a guy like Zabel. If not Zabel, there's other options, but I think he's the perfect fit in every single way. Seahawk characteristics and traits, things they look for, all about ball, smart, tough, dependable, versatile, can play every position on the line, and especially on the interior at either center or guard, has all pro potential. And that's why, again, go watch yesterday's show if you haven't already, because I go over some trade up scenarios there. But if he gets to like 12, 13, I think they're going to be working the phones. That's where I sit today. If the draft was tomorrow and I was doing my final mock draft of what I think they will do, a predictive mock draft, I'd go with Zabel at 18. You guys all figured out which side I was talking about. Dominic Scott, example, guard plus pick, trade back, LD from the Eagles. Are you talking about Landon Donovan? Are you talking about Landon Donovan from the Eagles? I don't think they would trade him, would they? They're not in salary cap trouble. Finding a good veteran guard who's still in his prime to trade for right now would be tough. I thought Corbin Smith did a really good job on Locked On Seahawks yesterday, talking about some potential trade targets with New Orleans. Cesar Ruiz, potentially Eric McCoy, although they just extended him. It would actually hurt their cap more by trading him unless they just want the picks because they need to get younger. But obviously Kubiak being familiar with the guys there, that Ruiz might be a possibility because they just signed Dylan Radins. Maybe they see some versatility or some flexibility there and a chance to add some picks. And then everybody wants to talk about Wyatt Teller and the whole, well, let me look this up. I was going to say the whole Uchenna Nwosu issue aside, like, I don't think that would prevent them from making a deal. I think Nwosu would say, yeah, you can get Wyatt Teller right now. Go get him. We'll figure it out. But I wanted to look at, hold on. Why is this not working? My keyboard's not working. Never mind. I was going to look at Wyatt Teller's cap hit, what it would cost to take it on. I think it's like 16, 17, $18 million the last time I checked. So the Seahawks could certainly fit that in. And the Browns might be willing to do that. They need very similar situation to the Saints. They have a terrible salary cap situation. They need to add younger players. They need to build around, whichever quarterback they take this year. Maybe they would be willing to trade a 31-year-old Wyatt Teller, especially given the fact that this draft is very strong in interior offensive line. They know they could turn around, get a younger player at that position. It's a possibility. Sometimes trades like that, though, if they haven't happened already, because a team can turn around and backfill in free agency or be proactive, sign a free agent, and then shop a guy. I think now teams are pretty much set. Like we're sifting through the bargain basement now in free agency, right? And so they're going to wait until we get closer to the draft. And maybe if the draft falls a certain way, then maybe they'd be open to trading a player like that. But those guys are hard to find. All we ever talk about is supply and demand not matching up with interior offensive linemen. And that's why they tend to get overdrafted and overpaid. And by the way, have y'all noticed ever since Schneider made those comments and then this year has tried to clarify those comments, you've heard that exact same comment being made by GMs and front office personnel and scouts and journalists and analysts that cover other teams all around the league? John got vilified for that comment, and I don't think he worded it the way he meant to. His clarification made more sense. But he was right. Everyone else is saying the exact same thing, and they're also doing the same thing, and they're proving his theory correct almost every day. So, tangent alert. Maybe I should just call the channel Tangents. Dave says we need some O-line with some nasty to them. It's been a long time since I saw a Seahawks O-lineman cleaning off the pile or playing to the echo of the whistle. You are absolutely right. There's two problems with the Seahawks offensive line right now. And no, one of them isn't lack of talent. Like, I believe there's a pile of young talent there that's all been recently drafted. You just have to coach it right, put it in the right scheme, figure out where guys belong, and then stick with it and get some continuity. But there are two things that this line lacks. One is a veteran presence. They're not going to get that now. They took a shot at it. They're not going to go sign a one-year retread like in Tomlinson last year. That's the reason they plugged him in there, and because they needed that veteran leadership in the locker room. They're the youngest. They have to be the youngest offensive lineman in the league. They average less than 25 years of age. I figured it out yesterday, 24.8 years of age. That has to be the youngest in the league, right? So that's one thing that they're lacking, but they're not going to be able to address that. But the other thing is nastiness. We just don't have it. Abe Lucas, yes. I think we'll see. And so this is an opportunity to add two. I don't necessarily think that showed itself last year as much as we've seen in the past because he still wasn't 100% healthy. But now a fully motivated, fully healthy Abe Lucas that's feeling himself again and feeling like Abe Lucas, he has that nasty. But the guy that you get high in this draft to add to that line has to have that quality about him as well. It is lacking. Charles Cross is a finesse player at left tackle. He's not a guy that's going to pancake players. I do think he's going to be a better fit in this scheme, and I think we're going to get the most out of him. Oluwatimi's a very quiet guy that just goes about his business. I think Anthony Bradford, Christian Haynes, very much the same way. Tao Lemea the same way. Zabel fits that mold. Donovan Jackson fits that mold. Tate Ratledge fits that mold. Luke Kandra fits that mold. Chase Lunt fits that mold. Who are some other guys off the top of my head? Miles Frazier fits that mold. From what I saw in Mobile, I don't think he's a scheme fit, though. I think Jackson Slater might fit that mold, but just a tick below those other guys I mentioned. So, yeah, that absolutely, they need to develop a personality. You talk about the best offensive lines in the league, that Dallas offensive line 6-7 years ago, that Cleveland offensive line up until last year, really, the Detroit offensive line, that Indianapolis offensive line when Kelly and Quentin Nelson were in their prime. They were just, what's the term? Jeff Simmons brought it up when he was on the show a couple weeks ago that Jim Mora used, dirtbags. They were like just snot bubble, just down and dirty, blue collar, all the cliches, lunch pail carrying, all ball, dirtbags. They need some nasty on that offensive line. They absolutely do. And that's the identity that Mike Macdonald wants to play with on both sides of the ball. And I think this draft is going to reflect that. When I see players that play like that with their hair on fire, I make a note. That guy could be a Seahawk, because didn't get an opportunity to really have an identity draft last year because Macdonald and the staff were just getting to know each other. We've talked about that ad nauseum. This year, they're much more involved. They're all on the same page. They know what they want. And I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it, Dave and John, Rockman, nasty dogs. Yep. Nicholas Newton, Zabel and Ratledge, definitely nasty. Dr. Strange says nastitude. I like that. Nicholas Newton. Dan, do you have any insight to what happened with Jenkins and a couple of the other vet guards that visited Seattle but just didn't sign? What made them not sign? Money, injuries? Yeah, with Jenkins, some of it is on the record and some of it is stuff that I've heard. They were concerned not just with the injury history, not just with the consistently nagging injuries, but also the back surgery he had as a rookie. But also the toll the injuries have taken on him. There are questions among not just the Seahawks, but there are things out there that teams were concerned about his want to and just his desire. He just didn't exhibit some of those Seahawk qualities of like smart, tough, dependable. Certainly all ball, nasty attitude. He just didn't impress them enough as a guy that was going to do everything it took to overcome the injuries and be a great player. And I think the contract he got in Cleveland reflects that. There was no demand for him. He signed a 1-year, $3 million deal with 4 void years. That's insane. He might not even make the roster this year. If they keep Teller and Bitonio, he's not even a lock to make their roster this year. So I do think that the contracts that Lucas Patrick, Dylan Radins, Jenkins, there are a couple other guys that visited that weren't publicized. The deals that those guys got elsewhere, I think, only verified why the Seahawks decided not to sign them. And I think that's a sound process, sound decision-making. A desperate team, a GM that wanted to appease his fan base would have just signed Jenkins no matter what. Okay, Cleveland's offering you $3 million with 4 void years. We'll just give you a 1 year. We'll give you the Laken Tomlinson deal. What was it? $3.5 million guaranteed last year. We'll give you that. Boom, done. But they weren't going to do that unless they had conviction that that player was better than what's on hand and had a better ceiling, or was better than they could get in the draft. Oh, this is fun. I'd rather be flying an X-Wing. How you doing, buddy? Tangent, thoughts on Seahawks being eligible for Hard Knocks. That's right. This is the first time in 15 years, right? Where, because they missed the playoffs last year and they don't have a new head coach anymore, they're one of the teams that the league could mandate being on Hard Knocks. And I think there's a good chance they will. The quarterback change, Cooper Kupp being in town, young, exciting coach, and just the fact that they've never been on it, right? Like before they made the rules where certain teams were exempt, there were years early in the Carroll and Schneider regime where they would have been eligible. And I don't know this for a fact now. This is just one of those, like, I think I remember hearing that they turned it down a few times. They just didn't want to peel back the curtain and let people inside and see all their processes and stuff behind the scenes, and which is a missed opportunity. That would have been so great to see Pete Carroll on Hard Knocks. Maybe we'll get it next year in Vegas, right? I would absolutely love it. The Seahawks have done more stuff in the last couple of years on their own YouTube channel, and we'll probably start to see some of that stuff. This is about usually this time of year. Some of the behind the scenes things and throughout the draft and everything, and they'll put some of that stuff out in like May and June when things are slower. It doesn't go as far as some of the other teams. I think it's very surface level type stuff. It's a lot of John just heaping praise on his lieutenants and the rest of his staff, right? Whereas like the Colts for years with Greg Ballard is that his name? Why do I think that's not his name? It's not Greg. Anyway, where they get really deep, but with stuff they produce themselves, really into the draft process and everything else, and how we went through the board and how we, our thought process going into each pick and some of the phone calls and behind the scenes stuff. We saw that from the Cardinals a couple of years ago, Monty Austinfort's first year. Remember that those clips of him like negotiating the trade up or trade down, I think, in the Paris Johnson pick. Seahawks don't like to give that kind of access, but they might have to. I think it'd be awesome. It'd be so much fun. Plus, if a certain content creator gets credentials this year, as there is reason to believe there's optimism for that, then maybe that content creator would show up in the background in a couple of shots on Hard Knocks. Scott Wallace. Schneider's been a master at negotiating contracts this offseason. Hard part of the job that fans have very little appreciation for. Glad he's ours. Nice to see a positive comment about Schneider these days. But also, you got to give Joey Lane credit. So Matt Thomas did the contracts here for 10 years, and then he decided to retire, get away from football, moved to Spokane. Joey Lane came over from the Packers, and he's been able to convince Schneider to do things differently. The Seahawks never used void years except in the COVID year when it was really necessary because the cap didn't go up and there just wasn't, the cap space was so tight. Since Joey Lane arrived, they've used void years a few times. They tacked a couple onto the Sam Darnold contract to keep that first year cap hit a little lower. And they also have some mandates from ownership too, a little bit differently than some of the teams out there. They like to keep their actual cash outlay every year to match their cap spending. We'll get into that in a future show. Just had trouble scheduling it, but I'll have an expert come on and we'll talk about that. It'll be boring for most of you, but some of you will be into it. But I think Joey Lane is really good at this. But even before him, just, not to dismiss the Schneider credit, I think for the most part, you've heard this about him for a long time. His finger is on the pulse of the league as much as any GM in the league. He has such a good idea about what other teams are looking for, what other teams want, what other teams need. He has such good connections with people around the league. He's built up a lot of trust with people around the league. He's well liked around the league. So he can pick up the phone, call anybody, and have a frank discussion with them about trade possibilities. But the other thing he's always been really good at is judging the market. And how many times have we seen him let players go test the market and then re-sign? We saw it most recently with Leonard Williams, obviously. But even I remember Red Bryant one year turned down their offer, went and explored the market, came back. Brandon Mebane did one year. I think he has a really good feel for that. So that was a cool comment. Thanks. Appreciate it. All right, let me make sure I haven't missed any starred comments, because just like that, you guys, an hour and 42. Sorry I couldn't get to everything, but you know what? That just means that you can save it for next time. Remember your homework assignment. Play around with the trade charts. Go to Draft Tech. Try the Jimmy Johnson one. Try the Rich Hill one. Whatever. Play around with some trade up scenarios, trade down scenarios. And not next week, because I'm doing my positional rankings, but just keep your eye out for the community page on YouTube and on Twitter, and I'll put it out there, and I'll ask for submissions, and then I'll put the best ones together, and we'll do a show on it. That will be a lot of fun. Make sure I didn't miss anything at the last second. Nope. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and all the other ways you can support the channel are down below. Thank you so much for the donations and the super chats and for being here tonight. Really appreciate it on a Saturday night with March Madness and the Mariners playing. I haven't even checked in. How we doing? Is the game over? They're so fast these days. I don't know. I'm going to check it out now. And I'm going to make my bacon corn bisque. Thanks, you guys. We'll see you next time. Forever and always, go Hawks.